Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and I'm a professor of construction management. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at the 8 areas of waste. In particular, we're going to be looking at extra processing that causes friction. This is a series that I've been doing that looks at all the things in construction that we have waste in, which is a lot. And if we want to be more profitable, if we want to better represent our industry, if we want to be more successful, I think you need to understand and control your costs. I think you have to understand where you're wasting things. And that's a big part of lean construction methodology, which really looks at waste in construction and adding value to yourselves, to the people you work with, to the trade contractors that you work with, to your clients who are basically buying your services. So I think extra processing is one that I think often goes unnoticed, and we really have to look at it in more depth because it's insidious. It causes a lot of, and I use the word friction. Friction isn't really sort of one of the words that's commonly used, but I like the word friction. All right, and friction means a number of things when we're talking about waste in construction. So by the end of this video, we want you to be able to identify areas of waste that maybe you weren't even looking at before, but now it's like, it's in the back of your mind. I'm noticing that we're doing a lot of stuff here that repeats itself unnecessarily, and it's kind of really grinds and grits at you. So we want to be able to identify those things, and then we want to look at some tools that we can use to help us reduce and eliminate, especially in the area of extra processing, today's topic. All right. And when we think about friction in construction, you know what? There's good friction. There's, if you're grinding something off that you need to do, that's maybe an okay thing. Unless you're grinding something that you shouldn't have had to grind, then that's maybe not a too good a thing. But we don't want to be spinning wheels. That causes a lot of friction, spinning wheels, and we don't really get anywhere. So how can we actually reduce that kind of friction? That's what we want to be looking at, because spinning wheels is not good. It's not good for anyone. And so we've got to do a bunch of things if we want to address it. So as I said, this is the video that we're looking at for extra processing steps. And I've done a series of videos. I'm going to do an intro video, kind of doing things in reverse. You know, what did Jacoby say? You know, if in doubt, invert. I'm going to do a video after this one that just sort of outlines all the videos that I've done in this particular series. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, as I mentioned, I'm a professor of construction management. I put up courses of videos. You can check my playlists from everything from MS Project to cost control to reading construction drawing to site management and on and on and on. So hopefully you'll find that useful running through my playlists. So these 8 areas of waste, I like this way that somebody figured out to order them in, which is downtime. It spells the word downtime. And they're not mutually exclusive, like they crisscross each other. And sometimes when you get one, it's producing another, as you'll see with extra processing steps. So you kind of have to have a grip on those areas of waste to have full understanding. I've got this chart up here. This is showing construction global productivity improvements. Not much. We are terrible at that, right? Like we have not made great advances in our productivity rates. Compared to the overall economy, compared to manufacturing, there are other global productivity stats by The Economist magazine, by many other areas, and they all point the same way. Right? Going back to 1960, we have not dramatically improved in our productivity. And there's a wealth of reasons for that, and many of them are interacted here. And I'm going to position this that a lot of them are in here that has been holding us back. So what can we do about it? What are we able to do about it? Well, I think first off, I think we have to understand what is extra processing, right? It's doing things that really aren't contributing to the project, that really aren't adding value to the project, right? It's doing things repetitively, unnecessarily. So we've got to be thinking about, well, what actually adds value here? And you know, I'm in the teaching profession, but I've been in the construction profession since I was 12 years old. And so trust me, I've seen a lot of waste. And in a lot of ways, it's not demeaning to anyone. It's an opportunity. Actually, you know, I think there's this quote in one of the Amazon books, The Store of Everything. I listened to this founders podcast, really excellent podcast called Founders, and he reviews different books on different entrepreneurs. And one was about Jeff Bezos, and it was sort of like somebody came to him with this problem that they had, and there was a lot of waste in it. And it was sort of like Bezos got excited about it. Excited, not mad, excited, because it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity. And I think in construction, based on that chart I just showed you, there's tons of opportunities. So this is great stuff. This is great stuff. So this is not trying to say you're doing this wrong, you've been doing it wrong for the last 40 years. This is trying to say we've got an opportunity, let's fix it. All right? And if we fix it, you know what? We're going to be more competitive against other companies. We're going to actually flourish. And within whatever role you play in construction, if you're a tradesperson, if you're a construction manager, if you're an estimator, with whatever role you play, if you are able to reduce the friction, you will do your job better. And then you will stand out. And then you will do well in your careers. In the construction industry, we definitely reward people who are good at what they do, right? Like a lot of industries, but maybe even in construction a little bit more because you stand out. So we're a fragmented industry. All that simply means, fancy word to say, you know, it's not as much repetition as some other industry. We've got a project, so we're very project oriented. We don't self-perform all the work ourselves. We don't have a GC that self-performs everything. We will generally have a lot of trade partners or subcontractors that we bring in to perform the work that we have to coordinate. So there's a lot of balls in the air to make these things coordinated to get them done, and they're complex. Construction is a complex industry, and so that gives us some challenges. Now, because we're complex, if we want to develop, so this condo building being built here, developers have a tough time, at least in Toronto where I reside, but I also know in other cities where I do a lot of consulting work, from New York to Boston to Houston to Dallas, you know, Vancouver. It causes a lot of frictions for developers. Well, why is there so much friction in development? Well, you are changing a neighborhood, and people live in that neighborhood, and they have what they call NIMBYism, not in my backyard. They don't want things, so they put pressure on politicians. Politicians put in more rules around zoning, rules around approvals. And they don't intentionally mean to make it really difficult, but over years and decades, you get layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy and approvals that were put in there for probably individually a good reason at that time. But when you take the cumulative aspect of it, it becomes very difficult to get things done. So that's one type of extra processing. Over design, over engineering something, providing something that is more than what the client needed. That could be another example of extra processing. Doing more than you need to do. Project Management Institute, I'm PMP, so Project Management Institute calls it gold plating. Doing more than you were required to do. And sometimes when you do more than you're required to do, the client looks at it like, I didn't really want that. And so you think you're providing something great, and they're not happy with it. Redundant and dated documentation. So we got to be careful with that, you know. And even when you have a change order, what are all the steps in that change order process? We have a lot of change orders in construction. What are all the steps? What are the steps we have internally? Often, what are the steps with your client that they have to get approvals on? And it can really slow things down. I do work with some of the larger universities, and if there's a lot of steps in getting those approvals, it can really slow down a construction process. And if there's a lot of unnecessary changes, that can really slow down a construction process. So if we have unnecessary approvals, and again, those lines of approvals were put in place at one time because something happened and this was to protect something. But then at a certain point, do we still need to do it this way to still protect the business that maybe is worried about something nefarious being done? That's the question. And technologies, obviously, they change over the past 20 years. Do we still need to do it this way, given that technologies have dramatically changed? So the other thing is unnecessary steps in a process. Are there unnecessary steps that we are passing this through somebody? Maybe they don't even have to approve it, but it's going through somebody to somewhere else, and that extra step could be a bottleneck in the process. So we have to look at that too, and we have to think about those. So extra processing is all of those things, right? So the goal is to identify extra processes and steps that are taking place unnecessarily. And I would also add, let's be realistic. There's some things you're not going to be able to change, right? Like you may not be able to influence change in that local city government that has put in a bunch of extra steps, unless you maybe work through a home building association that lobbies it, gets a lot of information out there. That's a possibility. And the industry has been doing a lot of that lately. And I think they've been getting somewhat through, but I think there's a long way to go on it. So I'm not saying you can't address that. But then if as an individual working for a company, that's probably not going to be high on your list, right? But what are things that you could influence? What are things that you could change? Maybe it's even in your own steps that you do. Perfect example for me when COVID hit was I had all these online tests that I had to all of a sudden start performing that I wasn't doing before, that I would do in person with groups. And I was just sending out the test and having them do the test, and they were sending back the answers, and I was manually marking them, and then I was sending them back the results because everybody wanted to know how they did. And this was taking hours of time, made no sense, a whole bunch of extra steps. And so what do? Well, that's something that is a low-hanging fruit that I should address. And so what I did was I looked at online testing software, found one, set it up. I do the test. I send them out a link. They do the test. They get their mark instantly. It all gets filled into a spreadsheet for me. I download it. So I took something that was probably taking me about 3 hours, that was total drudgery, and brought it down to about 5 minutes. Really, really good stuff, right? That's like a more than tenfold return on that effort. That's the gold ones when you find them, but you got to look for them. And you got to not just be doing it, not thinking about, why am I doing this with all these extra steps? There has to be an easier way, and then diving into it. So look at the ones that you can influence and change. Separate those from the ones you can't. Don't waste your time on those ones. Not for now. And then change them, right? Work at changing them and look for an effective ROE, return on the effort that you're going to put in. So when we think about examples of extra processing waste that you might encounter, what are some things? Well, over-engineering designs, having designs that are beyond what's necessary, as I mentioned, excessive approvals and documentations, too many layers that slow you down. I want to bring this one in. So if you notice, there's a bunch of price checkers here, right? And it reminded me of, again, I'll use that Founders podcast, a review. It was on Sam Walton. And Sam Walton used to fly around and visit a lot of the stores as they were opening Walmarts, and he'd visit the stores. And there was one store he went into, and he saw all these price checkers checking prices in it. And he talked to the manager, "What are you doing?" "Oh, well, they're checking the prices to make sure that we didn't make a mistake in the back." And Sam Walton's like, "Why don't we just not make the mistake in the back?" Right? Why do we need to have, this is adding an extra layer of bureaucracy to the company, and you extrapolate this over the whole company. What they're saving is nothing compared to what we're spending. And so it's look at, okay, but there obviously is some problems with the pricing of how we're doing the pricing in the back, let's make sure that we correct that. Probably how they came up with the scanning codes, because that was probably when they used to put stickers. So that was probably an influence on that. You've got to be looking at the root cause of the problem and looking at, am I adding an extra layer? Because, to his credit, he always said that, successful companies, they have to fight bureaucracy every step, because as soon as you get successful, you start adding layers. And the more layers that you add, all of a sudden, that early success that you have starts to wear you down, because you can't change things and it's a lot of extra cost. You can't be the lowest cost provider anymore, and somebody else is going to outmaneuver you. And that's something I think we have to think about in construction, that we don't have extra unnecessary layers. It's causing a lot of problems in the development field, as I said, and that does need to be addressed. But that one's a harder nut to crack, because it's also dealing with governments and different levels. It can be, but it's got to be done very strategically, and it's got to be done collaboratively through associations. But individually, definitely, like my example with the test, we can do something along those lines that we can definitely streamline things to make it easier. And so what can you do? What are some of the steps that you can do? Well, like I said, use Pareto. I've talked about Pareto in other videos, lean tool, 20/80, right? What is the one thing that you see that you could do that if you did it, it's going to bring you back a 4x, 5x result, right? Like I said with the test, it's bringing me back like a 20x result, right? For the effort I put into it, I'm going to get multiples back. They're there. I guarantee you, we're not so low on our productivity improvements that they're not all surrounding us. In manufacturing, a company that's using lean processes may be harder to find the big sort of whales that, you fix this, it's going to really catapult you. But for sure in construction, there's a lot of those. So start thinking on those. Actually, put it in the comments. If you've got ideas with it, I'd like to share it with the community. Ideas about construction, of where you see waste that you could hit this extra processing, these extra steps, and make improvements. Value stream mapping. All right, so value stream mapping is a process, and I'll do some more videos on that. But basically, you identify all the steps you're currently doing in getting an approval or a change order through, or an RFI process, or you name it, a submittal process. You identify the current state, steps, how long they take typically. And you do that collaboratively with the people involved to make sure you don't miss a step. Manager might have a view of all the steps. Somebody involved in the process might say, well, that's actually not how it goes. It goes here, 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 here. And the manager wasn't even aware of that, right? So you want to have the people involved in that process. So it might take a half day where you have a collaboration, that you identify the current state. You come back after people have had time to think about it, and then you develop what you see as the future state, and you work towards setting up that future state, because the future state is going to either eliminate steps or reduce the time involved in certain steps. Identify where bottlenecks are taking place and working to remove that bottleneck so you have better flow. You have better flow, you will be reducing your costs. You will be adding value to your clients. You will be more likely to deliver projects on time, on budget, or below budget. So these are all improvements here. You will have less rework and quality issues. So we develop standard operating procedures, because how do you then, if you don't have standard operating procedures, you don't even know what the current state is, because it's in flux, because it's all over the place. Well, then you got a lot of extra processing steps, because one time you're doing extra steps, another time maybe you're doing it okay. You got to develop standard operating procedures for these as a starting point. But be very careful with standard operating procedures, policies, that they are adding value, that they're not the extra, price checking process. You're hiring a whole bunch of people. You know what? You hire a whole bunch of people to do something they're going to do it. They're going to be asking for more inputs. We want complaints. We want to know the complaints. And then all of a sudden your complaints go up. You know, you have to be very cognizant about standard operating procedures, that you are doing this to make it as efficient and streamlined as possible, and in construction as safe as possible, right? So this is what you're after. If it's doing something that is going to be adding extra layers and costs and bureaucracy, that's where you've got to be very careful, because then those extra costs are not adding the value that you intended it to do. So keep that in mind. Nothing is ever easy. Nothing is ever easy, but it's definitely worthwhile when you have a good sort of broad perspective of how the pieces fit together and you're developing a good model for that. That continuously improves. So you want to now in construction, we're one of the worst ones at implementing new technologies. We are finally getting the world up and running in BIM, building information modeling. I had a wonderful presentation the other day by Turner Construction Canada. Thank you for that. But as a whole industry, we've got a long way to go with it, right? And there's a lot of opportunities with it. And so we have to implement new technologies, including building information modeling, including productivity softwares, without naming too many names, but Procore, FieldWire, Bluebeam, basically the new architectural desktop cloud-based tool as well. We have to make those improvements, and we have to make those investments, right, on the larger scale. So if you're a smaller contractor, you know, you've got to advance to the level that makes sense in your particular sector, but don't underrate the influence that new technological advances can have. But don't go for every shiny object either. So you've got to be careful on that. Utilize, get feedback from workers. Like, this is giving you ideas, right? So you want to get feedback from workers to get ideas. I think Jack Welch had a quote one time, and you know, when he took over GE, somebody said to him, you know, Jack, I've worked with my hands for 25 years on the line. Nobody once asked me my ideas, right? And that's a waste. We talked about that in non-utilized talent before. That's a whole area of the 8 areas of waste. Utilize AI tools to help identify, brainstorm, and provide ideas for waste reduction. It's surprising. I just did a video last week on AI and using it. If you haven't, I would check that video out, because that's free. Like, you can be using these tools now to a certain extent. You can take it further if your company's a large company. I'm sure they are. But basically, you can be using these tools to help identify, to help solve particular problems, to give you ideas, to brainstorm. It can be really, really helpful once you understand how the tools work. It's not like just Googling something, searching something. It's like digging and prompting and getting answers, and then being happy with it and digging further and kind to get to the root of the particular issue. You'll find that very useful in helping you to root out waste and extra processing waste as well. So that would be another tool that I would highly recommend to you trying if you haven't already. So value stream maps, Pareto, and you could use AI tools to say, well, I watched a video and it was a YouTube video, Tom Stephenson, and it was on construction extra processing waste. And you know, it was mentioned that Pareto could be used in helping to reduce waste in extra processing. How might Pareto be used in reducing waste on construction project? You can even identify what your construction project is. Give it, the more information you give it, the better its answer can be. Or if its answer is not that good in the beginning, then you can take some of that and dig deeper and deeper. But that's a good starting point just to get right off the bat with it. So try that. You know, give me a comment on if you've tried that, how it worked, it didn't work, it worked, and ideas that you might have on this. It's very helpful for the community as we keep talking these things out on some of the different videos that way. And if you enjoyed this video, please click subscribe. Again, it helps the construction community that way, and it helps the channel. And so I'm Tom Stephenson. I hope this gave you some ideas, and I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.